So, Judd, you over at Popular Info have been covering, I mean, among other things, but you have really been on for a while now. The the beat that's covering how employers are treating their employees, and it's a specific set of employees in many respects. I mean, it's not, we're not talking about. We're talking about people who are considered necessary, right, or key, but they're not. We're not talking about medical workers who are working medical or folks who are necessarily working for the federal government. It's all the people who are helping with cable, helping with working at supermarkets, working, for UPS and delivery services overall. And then we can get into some of the specifics. How would you say those companies are doing, or maybe we can talk about it from the perspective of the employees? How are they doing with this?
Well, I think a lot of them are pretty scared from, talking to them. And I try to talk to as many as I can when I do one of these pieces. I do it a company at a time, and I try to get in touch with a good cross section of folks. But most people are scared. I think, like everyone, it's hard to acquire the protective equipment. If you want to go out and buy a bottle of Purell right now, it's pretty difficult. And I guess these big companies either are unable or unwilling to do what it takes to get these kind of supplies. So a lot of people don't have supplies. They're putting their health and in some respects their lives at risk. And they're either, they were starting off at pretty meager pay, paid hourly in most cases. And then they're either getting nothing additional, or they might be getting $2 more per hour. And that's actually good compared to what some people are getting. Nothing. Some people are getting, a $25 gift card. So I think it is a real struggle, especially when you think about the risks that a lot of these folks are putting themselves under.
Yeah, I mean, I'm been struck, by the I guess the variance just in terms of like UPS, and let's talk about them because you wrote a piece on them just within the past day or two, I think it was. That some of the guys who deliver packages to UPS, they're showing up. One guy had a mask, one guy had gloves, one guy nothing, and they are I've been just sort of shocked at I had to tell them a week ago, like, cardboard, it stays on cardboard for 24 hours. And they're like, I didn't know that. And I was like, I don't, how do you, that seems to me like that would be the first thing. They would be the first people to know this, right? Like they would be the first people who would be, this is what their bosses would tell them. Here are your potential, dangers, and here's how you protect yourself. And, here you can share this information with customers if you run into them. And they just seem to be completely left in the dark about this. And I was sort of shocked.
Yeah, I think the communication is really severely lacking at UPS. And it's interesting, you talk to the company, and they have a very smooth line about all the things they're doing, they're communicating, all the proper procedures, they're providing all the right equipment. But then you go down and talk to the people who are actually on the ground level doing the work, and what they'll say is, oh yeah, there was a poster that was slapped up somewhere a few days ago, but other than that, I haven't seen anything, and I haven't heard anything, and I haven't seen any of this equipment. Like, one of the things that really struck me about UPS was they talked about how they're frequently refilling their automatic hand sanitizers, those ones that you just put your hand under and it kind of shoots the sanitizer into you. And almost without exception, these UPS employees, dozens of UPS employees, they've never even seen one of these automatic hand dispensers. And one of the things they were talking about is that their jobs, especially the drivers, their jobs don't really lend themselves to frequent hand washing. There's no place to wash your hands, and now all the businesses are closed. So the places where they might go into, a McDonald's or something like that to wash their hands, that's not available to them either.
I mean, one would expect, right, that they would have these things in their trucks. And I guess, I mean, on one hand, I can understand, they as individuals have trouble securing this stuff because they're like all individuals, it feels like in the country. But one would expect the buying power of UPS. I mean, they presumably have planes that deliver stuff all around the country, all the world, right? I mean, you would imagine that there's somebody there who could be like, we can get a whole, I don't know, plane load of Purell or whatever it is, in the Philippines, and we can fly it up here in a day. We'll have it in a day, and we'll have they're a logistics company. Right. I mean, and so you'd expect that they would have this. What's going on there? I mean, even from a sort of, even from the most cynical sort of like business perspective, I would think if they could say, hey, we're making all the effort in the world to make sure that your packages arrive to you, as safe, if not safer than when they left the facility when we picked them up.
Yeah, I think that. And I have heard from workers who literally talk about packaging up a lot of these materials, but not having them available to themselves. They're sending them to other people, but they don't have them in their own facility. And I'm not really sure what's going on, but I think with a lot of the companies, UPS and some of the other companies that I've been focusing on, as the economy kind of slows down and slides, I think, pretty clearly into a recession, there are certain companies, and UPS is one of them, the supermarkets are another one of them, Amazon's probably another one of them, that actually are facing unprecedented demand. It's like the day, it's like the last shipping day before Christmas every single day, because so many more people are buying things with packet, they want to get things delivered because they don't want to go out because they're trying to stay home, which is a good thing to do. But it seems to me that the focus is really on how do you satisfy that demand so we can maximize the revenue we bring in. And I think that's why there's not necessarily a focus of slowing down and not having these places operate if there's not the appropriate protective supplies for the workers. And I think that's why a lot of these companies have fairly restrictive sick leave policies that require either a positive test, good luck getting one of those, or some sort of formal quarantine order in order to get sick leave, because they really don't want people calling out sick unless they're sure that they have COVID-19, because they need people to keep up with demand. So it's really a matter of what they're prioritizing. And to me, it seems like in a lot of cases, they're prioritizing keeping up with this unprecedented demand.
I suppose it's sort of shocking in a way. I mean, it is, maybe I'm being naive, and in some respects it reminds me of, Ring of Fire has a long history of talking to tort lawyers, and they go in and they see corporations that are cutting corners, that are, they've been doing development on a product for years, or they have a pharmaceutical product that they want to sell off label. And maybe they have some information that there's a potential that this could harm a certain percentage of their customer base. And they're just like, there's just too much cash here. And, we perceive that as a potential cost of doing business. It may show up, it may not. We may be able to predict how much it is. We may get it off by 20, 30%. But nevertheless, we're making just too much cash. And that's job number one right now. We'll deal with the implications later. And those implications are that people can get really sick.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that there's not a lot of long-term thinking here, and they want to make sure that they cement these these customer relationships, because this could last, as everyone knows, a long time. So it's not just that they're making good money for a week. It's if they can establish themselves as reliable, they can make good money for months and months and months, maybe a year or more, until things, slowly return to kind of normal business. So there's a lot at stake in terms of cash, and the workers, I think, are seen as fungible in this situation, and they're rolling the dice with it.
Have you gotten a sense of are there specific sectors? Are there specific employers or employees, groups of employees who are starting to take some type of labor action? I mean, I know obviously Whole Foods is a big one, and Instacart. What can you tell us about those, to the extent that you've come across any of them?
Yeah, and I haven't reported myself on Instacart, but I do know that they've taken some action, and actually even the threat of action was able to get them some concessions as far as pay and sick leave and things along those lines. Amazon, I think, and Whole Foods, I think, is a particularly kind of vexing case, because if anyone has the resources to support their workers at this time, it is Amazon. And they really are doing the minimum. They've done, it's interesting because they're one of the ones who are left with the most restrictive sick leave policy. They're still on, you need a positive test, effectively, a diagnosis, or an order to be quarantined, which most people don't get because people are being told to self-quarantine if they get sick. And I think they've combined that with something that's good in the right context, which is they're increasing pay $2 an hour, and then more significantly for overtime pay, another 50% essentially for overtime pay. But when you combine those two policies, making it very difficult to be paid when you're sick, but also really incentivizing people to show up because they're giving them an opportunity to make significantly more money than they were before, especially with these overtime hours, you're really creating a very dangerous situation where people are going to maybe just push aside some mild symptoms. And there's one thing we know from this virus is that some people get very seriously sick and end up in the hospital, and they can't breathe, have to be put on a ventilator. Other people have relatively mild symptoms that you can function with, that you barely notice. And that could be a vector to spread that to other people who might be more vulnerable. So it's not a great situation. It would be much better if these companies created a situation where if people weren't feeling well, they could just stay home and get paid. But I think they're really worried about people, in their view, people taking advantage of that and then them not having enough workers. And that's what they're focused on.
Do we have any indication of workers like this being vectors yet? I mean, I've seen a broad expression of just how likely or possible, or how much caution you should have when you're dealing with, say, with packages or with food deliveries or with food itself, or stuff that you buy and happen to pick up at a supermarket. Do we have any sense? I mean, is there any? I mean, and I guess maybe this might be a good question to ask before we segue into the excuses that we're starting to hear from Donald Trump and the Republicans as to they're dealing with this, and maybe it's what we're all missing is some type of federal authority coming out and saying, like, look, here are the standards that you need to maintain for packages. Here is the likelihood that, it is being passed on by, touching a plastic that somebody had packed in an Amazon warehouse where they may have had COVID, something like that. I mean, do you have any sense? Is there anybody that you've come across that has, in the course of your reporting, that has even like from an anecdotal perspective of like, this is where I think I got it from just like being around other workers or from a package or whatever?
Well, I haven't heard that, but I do know in a lot of the companies that I've covered, Kroger, which is the biggest supermarket chain, they've had a number of people, I think they're up to 4 or 5 now, who have tested positive. And definitely the other workers who are in some of those same stores are worried. Amazon has had a fairly significant number of people test positive, particularly in their New York area warehouses. UPS has had people test positive. So I think that, it's definitely something that within these workforces, it's happening. And so you would expect that, it's certainly very possible that especially if you think of someone like a supermarket employee who's really more in close contact with the public, either spreading it to the public or, and this is more of an issue with like an Amazon or a UPS in the warehouses, I've been told by a lot of people that it's really in a lot of these situations impossible to maintain 6 feet of distance between the person, the other people you're working with, just because of the way. I mean, this is not something I've experienced with, but they tell me the way that it's set up, there's just not enough space to do that and to do your job. So I think there's both of those risks. I don't know. I mean, I don't think anyone who contracts it necessarily knows now. Now, I mean, maybe right in the beginning when you had sort of like the contact tracing and, this person had it and I was near this person, but like we're so far beyond that with, close to 200,000 cases. I don't know. I haven't heard from people who know specifically like where they got it.
All right. Lastly, let's just talk about this because this is, you get the sense that this weekend Mitch McConnell mentioned it on Hugh Hewitt's show, and then Donald Trump got asked it and expressed something at his daily TV briefing. And you start to hear this talking point that impeachment in some way distracted Trump from the COVID-19 response. You have a fantastic timeline at Popular Information under, I think the name of the post was Excuses. But just, broadly speaking, I mean, obviously we're getting an indication that the Trump administration now realizes, they see this as a political liability now because they realized for an extended period of time, they were just saying, no worries about this. You outlined pretty, I think, decisively that, if he was distracted by impeachment and was prevented from doing this work, part of that might be a function of his, I don't know, dozen or so golf outings, maybe more, and his traveling. And there was a lot of other things going on that he somehow seemed to find time for, but the COVID-19 was sort of late. Broadly speaking, just, give me your take on this and where it's going.
Yeah, I think that you can look at the time. The only time this is plausible, right, is between the time he was impeached and the time he was acquitted. He was acquitted on February 5th, and really there was a whole month plus there where almost nothing happened. That it isn't even a plausible excuse. But if you just look at that period, he was not solely focused on impeachment. Far from it. He was constantly at Mar-a-Lago. He golfed. In one point, I think he golfed 12 times in 14 days. The only days off were Christmas and another day that he was holding a campaign rally. He held many campaign rallies, 6 or 7, during the time between he was impeached and he was acquitted. He went to an economic conference in Switzerland where he totally dismissed the threat of COVID-19. So the idea is that if he just wasn't impeached, he would have been on top of this. It just doesn't. It's almost laughable, and I almost didn't even write this piece because it's so absurd. But I did feel like, well, it seems like this is going to be a thing, so it might be good just to get all this down. to kind of have it and refer back to it later when it comes back up. So I kind of bit the bullet and did it, but it's such a ridiculous idea. I mean, the reality is until probably 2 or 3 days ago, Trump was saying, oh, this is going to be all over by Easter. So
yeah, he was saying
he didn't
8 days from now. 8 or 9,
Yeah.
8 or 9 days from now, that this was going to be over. And somebody must have, been able to, I don't know if it was like, we have internals that show that it's actually good for you. Your numbers are going up. And he's like, okay, well then I guess it's bad now. And I'll go out and talk about that. But yes, it is laughable that impeachment somehow impeded him. But there have been funnier things that have turned out more tragic during this administration. And so I'm glad you did that, and folks can check that out. That's one of those timelines that I think would be very helpful for people to pass around widely. Judd Legum, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Sam.